Hey, thanks so much for checking us out online for Common Ground. My name's Ryan Keaton. I'm the associate pastor here at First Baptist Church, Lexington. We meet every week at 14 Monroe Avenue at 7 p.m., and we would love for you to check us out live. The message you're about to watch is in our Be the Difference, Moving from Intention to Action series, as I teach the message on I Will Go. So here's the lesson for that series. So tonight, we are continuing our Be the Difference series, moving from intention to action. And tonight we're talking about the idea of I will go. So movement. How can we actually go from this idea of I want to do it, I have the greatest intentions to do it, I have the thought to do it, or the conviction. How do we move from that to actually going and doing it? So the first question that I have is this. What do you, and this is your opinion, so just spout that out there. What is the greatest need that you see in our community? This is the point of the lesson in which you can speak back to me. Greatest need. There's not a wrong answer. Chick-fil-A. So yeah, we need better food options here. So our greatest need is more food options. Yeah. All right. So maybe it's restaurant needs. Maybe you think the greatest need in our community is like more jobs, so that we can bring people in. We can have better infrastructure. There's a reason people would move to Lexington, Tennessee. Whatever it is, you could go many different areas or directions with this thing. I think just kind of, I'm outside of Lexington. There's probably several in here who kind of are from outside of Lexington and have moved in, which is a different animal than if you've lived in Lexington your whole life, because like Henderson County, it's hard to crack that nut to get in for the first time. Lexington is a very closed community, really. And so I think that outsiders have a different perspective than maybe people who have lived here their whole life. But one thing that I see about Lexington, that's not just a Lexington thing or a Decatur County thing or a Scottsdale thing or wherever, but I think it's probably a lot of maybe even Tennessee or the South, and that's just the idea of I think one of our greatest needs is awakening the spiritual giant that is religion. One thing that I've seen is that we have a lot of religious people in our community, but we don't have a lot of Christ followers. A lot of true, legit people who are on fire for Jesus. We have a lot of people who say they go to church somewhere. We have a lot of people who can say the right things. They know the Sunday school answer, but we don't have a lot of people actually going and doing things for Jesus. And I was talking with people, and in our church, there's been several people here as of recent, many sitting in this room tonight, who have recently given their life to Jesus, been in church their whole life. And I think that that's a hard thing to do sometimes, because when you're in sin and in the world and not living for Jesus, ultimately when you hear the gospel, I don't have that and I need that. But when you've been in church your whole life and you have all the head knowledge in the world, it's hard to see that you need something that you think that you already have. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind when we think about this idea of I will go. And tonight we're going to look at a story that's in 3 of the 4 Gospels. So one thing I love about the Synoptic Gospels are the fact that it just continues to show how these men lived life together. They saw the same accounts together, but yet they, in their own personalities, communicated them differently. So we're going to be in Mark's account, Mark 2, 1 through 12, but the story is also found in Luke 5, 17 through 39, and then very briefly in Matthew 9, 1 through 8. If you want to go back and look at the other accounts and see how they explained it, but Mark, I think, gives the most detail for what we're talking about tonight. So we're going to be in Mark 2, 1 through 12, and the story says this. When he entered Capernaum again after some days, it was reported that he was at home, this being Jesus. So many people gathered together that there was no more room, not even in the doorway, and he was speaking the message to them. Then they came to him bringing a paralytic carried by 4 men. Since they were not able to bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above where he was. And when they had broken through, they lowered the mat on which the paralytic was lying. Seeing their faith, Jesus told the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." But some of the scribes were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does he speak like this? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" Right away, Jesus understood in his spirit that they were thinking like this within themselves and said to them, "Why are you thinking these things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up, pick up your mat and walk'? But so that you may know the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins," he told the paralytic, "I tell you, get up, pick up your mat, and go home." Immediately he got up, picked up the mat, and went out in front of everyone. As a result, they were all astounded and gave glory to God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." So tonight we're going to see 4 things on this idea of I will go and how we can move from intention to action in our community, ultimately through the example and just the principles that we see through the stories of these 4 friends. And the first thing is that they saw the need. They saw the need. And so they realized the source of the problem, that ultimately, like, while yes, this guy physically had needs that he had to overcome, he had no way of getting to Jesus himself. There was no way that he could have walked. He was paralyzed. There was no way he could have himself gotten to Jesus to hear him teaching. They didn't have the ADA and all of these wheelchairs and ways where this man could have gotten himself to Jesus. He couldn't have rolled in a wheelchair or nothing. I mean, he was stuck wherever people would carry him, and whenever they set him down, that's where he was at. And so ultimately, these friends realized that the only way that this person, that our friend here, has any chance is if he gets to Jesus, if he finds Jesus. And in our community, people need a lot of things. We live in a low to lower class, really. We have a little bit of a middle class here, but we have a lot of poverty in Henderson County. So, I mean, it wouldn't have been a far stretch for you to say the greatest need in Henderson County would be financially. There's a lot of people, when we do community meals, when we do, at the help centers and, just all of the different low-income places that we have, you could very easily say, what our community needs more than anything is just financial help. Or, we need to be able to have programs to provide these people jobs or training to where they can get out of this just endless cycle, it seems like, of, you have probably now 3 and 4 generations of families that live in our community who have never held a job. And so it seems like an endless cycle. So that might be something you see as the greatest need. And it's so easy sometimes to get, to look at like the repercussions of what is happening rather than get to the source of what people's greatest need is. Now, I mean, ultimately, yes, this guy had physical needs, but we see through the story he also had spiritual needs that he had to overcome as well. Because ultimately Jesus first spoke to what? His sins. He said his sins were forgiven. And it will be very easy, in student ministry we see this all the time, that students come in, and so the first thing that we try to combat a lot of times is their behavior of things that they're doing. But ultimately there's a reason behind the behaviors of what they're doing. And if you don't get to the source of that, and the fact that they need Jesus, then you're just doing behavior modification. And in everybody's life, behavior modification will not save somebody. Ultimately, we need life transformation, and that can only be found through Jesus Christ. And so the first thing is they saw the need. And for us to actually be able to move from intention to action, we have to start opening our eyes to the needs of those around us. Because it's so easy to get caught up in our own stuff, our own junk, our own lives, that we miss out on the fact that there are people around us who have needs. And while we might be struggling ourselves and we might be going through our own stuff, every one of us in this room are blessed beyond measure. Just the fact that we have the opportunity to join here weekly and be encouraged by fellow believers, man, we have a good support group here. So we should use this to be able to help others' needs. So the first thing is they saw the need. So are we going to be willing to be humble, to have our radar out to see the needs of others' lives? So first, they saw the need. Second, they didn't take no for an answer. So this is a question I want some feedback on. What are things that keep us from doing what we know we should do? So what are some things that keep us from doing? Fear. What else? maybe time. I'm sorry? Pride. Yeah, what others will think of us, so we're just afraid of, our reputation or get made fun of. So yeah, fear, pride, our reputation, maybe time. Maybe we just are doing so much that we're like, I just can't put anything else on my plate. It's very easy for us to say no to great things in our life. And if you're anything like me, you probably fill your time with a lot of good things. But sadly, I think a lot of times we sacrifice the best thing for good things. We do a lot of good things, but we miss out on the better things that God has for us because we've just become so overwhelmed with good stuff, but it's just not the best stuff that God has for us. And so we don't have any time left for the plan and the purposes that God has called us to do. These men, these friends, first off, could have just been like, I'm just going to go hear Jesus, and not even thought about their paralytic friend. They could have just been so worried about themselves that they just wanted to go hear Jesus themselves, and they didn't even think about this guy. But then, for whatever reason, they did think of him, and they could have gotten there, and they could have very easily just said, you know what? We tried. We showed up. The house was full. There's no way to get this guy in. We gave it, our best effort. Maybe next time. And I think that's where I fail a lot of times. I'll put a foot forward, but then at the first sign of resistance, I'm like, God, I tried. I was obedient. I went and knocked on that door, and, I heard him shuffling around in there, but I tried to talk to him, and it was just real awkward. So, we just talked about the weather for about 2 minutes, and then I said, see you later, and, whatever. And that's what we do so many times. When things get tough, we say no quicker than just trying to stick it through. And they didn't take no for an answer. They were like, you know what, we're gonna stick this thing out because we feel like this is what God is calling us to do. This man needs Jesus. And so we're not gonna take no for an answer. We're gonna try to figure it out. And that leads us to point 3. They did whatever was necessary. They did whatever was necessary. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go around and start cutting holes in roofs or anything. Probably not a good idea. Not gonna lie to you, like if I was preaching, like this just shows, like if I was preaching and plaster started falling in on me, probably wouldn't be able to carry on that message too well, I wouldn't say. This probably took a little bit, and not only did they cut the roof out, but then they had to have planned this in such a way, they cut it big enough to lower a man on a mat through it, and then they lowered him down. Like, I love the Bible because I try to picture these crazy stories in my mind, so I'm just trying to picture, like they're crammed into this little house, listening to Jesus. All of a sudden, they're like, why is it getting bright all of a sudden? It's because there's a hole in the roof now. They got dirt all over them. And then this man starts being lowered down. They're probably like, what is going on? And so I don't know if Jesus just kept talking. I'm preaching one day in church and somebody's iPad starts reading the scripture and everybody's looking at that person whose iPad, and I'm like, just try not to pay attention. Just keep talking, get everybody's attention back. I don't know if that's what Jesus did. Don't mind the roof, don't mind the sky falling in on us. Let's just keep talking. I don't know what Jesus did. But I can just imagine that the people in the room were like, what's about to happen? I don't know if Mark was back there I'm going to take better notes so my account of the gospel is more thorough than the rest of the people. I don't know what was going on. But obviously, these men, they did whatever was necessary, right? They were like, we got to get our friend to Jesus. I'm going to do whatever's necessary to get my friend to Jesus. And ultimately, in this moment, that means cutting a hole in the ceiling and doing what it takes. So just think about this in your mind. What do you think it would take to lead other people to Jesus? Would it take you maybe taking some time out of your day that you would normally spend watching Netflix or, for me, playing golf clash, whatever? Would it take you not doing that for you taking 3 minutes instead of you doing that and sending a text to somebody and saying hey, thinking about you today, praying for you. Who knows what that small message that you send to somebody as an encouragement, what that could do for them spiritually. How that could encourage them, how that could, or you just saying, you know what, instead of doing this tonight, I'm going to try to meet with somebody for dinner or for lunch and just try to have a conversation that leads to spiritual things. Whether you share the gospel or break the Bible out or anything, you could just simply talk to them about what God is doing in your life or the struggles you're going through and how God is kind of helping you through that, whatever. But just being intentional about trying to intersect people's lives with the gospel, because that's exactly what these people did. They didn't know, I don't think, exactly what Jesus would do in this situation. I'm sure they had heard stories of Jesus. I'm sure they maybe even heard teachings of Jesus. But I don't imagine that they knew to the extent that Jesus would not only heal this guy physically, but they would heal him, that Jesus would heal him spiritually too. I mean, that's like the perfect storm there of the things that could have happened. That was like the perfect response that Jesus did. So these men, they didn't really know what was going to happen, but they ultimately knew this guy's best chance is being intersected with Jesus. And we don't know. When we share the gospel with somebody, when we reach out to somebody, we don't know what the outcome will be. It's kind of the idea of, sowing that seed. We plant it, somebody else might water it, but ultimately God produces the growth. And we might not ever see the harvest. We might not ever see the fruit of the growth of us reaching out to somebody. But we got to say, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen for me reaching out and me going and pouring in other people's lives. But I'm going to do whatever is necessary to intersect their life with Jesus, and I'm going to let Him handle the rest. And I think that's what a lot of us need to do. Like, we're afraid to put action to our intentions. We're afraid to actually go because we're afraid of the consequences of what will happen when we do that, when we just need to leave the results to Jesus. The men had no idea what was going to happen after they cut the hole in that roof. They didn't know, apparently this was Jesus' house, because it said that it was reported that He was home and people gathered there in the room. So I'm assuming they're cutting a hole in Jesus' house. That's a pretty bold move there. But maybe they thought, He's the creator of the universe, His dad's a carpenter, He can fix this little, He can sheetrock this back up or whatever. I don't know. I guess they said, ultimately, if He can heal a blind man and walk on water, He can patch a roof. I don't know. But they did it. They didn't worry about the consequences. They're like, we'll do whatever's necessary. They got their friend to Jesus. So they saw the need. They didn't take no for an answer. They did whatever was necessary. Fourthly, they didn't listen to the noise of the crowd. So again, I love the Bible because it's so brutally honest. And it also is very encouraging because it tells me that people don't change ever. And in that, what I mean is that it doesn't matter what happens and how great a situation can be, there will always be people who complain. There are always going to be grumblers and complainers. You have the Son of God teaching. Probably one of the greatest messages. We don't know what the teaching was, but the room was packed. And then, on top of this crazy teaching, you get a dinner. It's like dinner and a show. You see a hole get cut in a roof. People are going to talk about that. You'll never believe it. We're watching Jesus. All of a sudden, a dude starts getting lowered from the heavens. We don't know what's happening. And then, He stands up and walks out of the joint. And His sins are forgiven. I'm sure people are like, you should have been there. You missed it. But out of all these great things that happen, you have a group of people that want to complain about it. And for me, I try so hard to be a people pleaser and not to make anybody mad or all those things. And so it's very discouraging sometimes when you know you're doing the right thing and people complain. You're for me, I'll go back and evaluate how could I have done this better or all these things. But ultimately, what I see from this story is that ultimately when you're doing the right thing and you're doing things from God, there's going to be people that complain. And sometimes that's even religious people, quote unquote religious people. Even people, because these were just the people, they had to be somewhat religious because they're here to listen to Jesus. And so at one point, the supporters now become the scoffers on the other end, they become the ones complaining. And so you're gonna get resistance. And so many times we stop going because we're afraid of the grumbling and the noise of the world around us. And the truth of the matter is, if we start going out into our community and making a difference, people are not going to like it because they like it just how it is. They don't want things to change. And honestly, when God starts moving, people start getting uncomfortable because they start seeing things they've never seen before. I guarantee everybody in that room had never seen a man who was paralyzed, who had to be lowered in by his friends, not only gain movement, but he got up and picked up the bed he was just carried in there on and walked out. The guys, they didn't care about the noise of the world that was going on around them. They didn't care about any of those things. They ultimately said, I'm going to do whatever is necessary for me to go. And for you, I don't know what that is. Like and for a lot of us, it's probably the noise more than anything that keeps us from going and doing the things God calls us to do. Maybe it's the noise from people in our life, our family, our friends. We don't have the support that we need. Maybe it's the noise that goes on inside of our own heads, the doubt that we have of our insecurities or past sin or present sin that we're in. Or maybe it's things that have happened to us in our past, or like, we all have calendar dates, right? We all have things that come up that it's just a normal day for everybody else, but for us it means something different, right? Maybe it was the passing of someone, or maybe it was an anniversary of something that happened. And so when those things come up, like, it becomes harder on that day for us to really be all there, right? Because whether it was a good thing at one point and now it's kind of bittersweet because that person's not there anymore, or maybe it's just the anniversary of something that's happened, or it's hard for us to be all in sometimes. And so we let these days and these anniversaries and this noise in our lives, the noise in our head, keep us from going and doing the things that we want to do, because it almost like isolates us to the point where we're just paralyzed. And a lot of us, we have the greatest intentions in the world, and we really want to put it into motion, but we're just afraid. We're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of the noise of the world. I know for me, like, when you go to church and when you sit around other believers, like, it's really easy to start like the comparison game of, well, like, I know I need to go, and I know I need to take my friends to Jesus, or I need to try to like intersect people's lives with the gospel, but I just don't have the same testimony as all these other people. I don't have the same skills as all these other people. And it's really easy to start looking at your life and your sins in a comparison game, and before you know it, Satan has convinced you that you're the exception to the rule, that, man, God can't forgive you or God can't use you. And a lot of times it could even be situations that you had no control over. And just because, I don't know if people are scared or lack of transparency in the church or what, but we don't always talk about our struggles or the things that's difficult for us. And because of that, when others are struggling and things are tough, they don't know that they're not the only ones that go through things. Like for me, for example, I've been blessed to where, like, I had the great opportunity my entire life. I was raised in church, and I know that that's unheard of. With two parents who I knew both loved me, and they both are still married to this day, and that doesn't happen. That's a rarity at this point. So I was blessed. And as far as like my childhood and things like that, like, man, God blessed me so much in those areas. So people would look at my life and my testimony and think that there's no struggle in my life, and it would, I think, be very easy to say, like, Ryan, your life has been cake or things. And if I wasn't transparent and talked about my struggles with anybody else, it would be very easy for people to say, Ryan, you have nothing in your life that could help me. But there are things that I've done. I've made stupid mistakes. I've went down paths I shouldn't have, and so that helps me lead into others. But there's also been a lot of things that have happened to me that a lot of times were out of my control, but have made me into the person I am today. For example, one of them. We talked about the anniversary dates and the dates in the calendar, and February 12th means nothing to everybody in this room for the most part, but like for me and Rebecca, February 12th, and really the days like the 11th through the 14th, they're days that are real bitter to us, because this is the anniversary of the whole situation between Charlie and Olivia that happened in our lives. And for those who don't know what that is, my senior year, Rebecca's junior year, when we were at Union, her roommate, Olivia Greenlee, my roommate, Charlie Pittman, they were fiancés. Charlie was one of my best friends, and Olivia was Rebecca's roommate. And for whatever reason, the night of February 11th, 2014, Charlie murdered Olivia on Union University's campus. And then proceeded that night for the next 12 hours to lead me and him on a wild goose chase all over Jackson and in attempts to find her. Well, the morning of the 12th, safety and security, the union, I guess police, they found her on campus in her car. And so the 12th is a bittersweet day because it was the day that we found out 5 years ago that we lost a friend. The 14th, Valentine's Day, was the day that we actually found out we lost 2 friends, because we found out that day that it was Charlie who was the one who did it. And so that's a situation in our life that, while it's crazy to think it's been 5 years to this day, that's a situation that nobody would know about if we didn't talk about it anymore, because it's been disassociated with us for a while. But it is, at least in my life, one of the most bedrock moments, because in that situation, even though I had no control over the things that were going on around me, I was brought to a crossroad in my faith on whether I was going to draw closer to God or whether I was going to run to God. And to be honest with you, I wish I could have said at the very beginning that I was always strong and I always made the best decisions, and that I always said, God, I know that you're in control in this situation, I'm going to trust you, but I didn't. To be honest with you, it took me a long time to even pray to God. And my first prayer was, God, I don't even know what to say to you, so I'm just going to sit here and let you talk if you want to, because I don't even have words to say. And I was angry, to be honest with you. I was angry at God because, and even now, I still can't fathom how that could be good. I can't understand the good out of that situation, even after seeing people saved at her funeral and all of those things. I can't understand how that could have been a good situation and where the good could come out of it. But I do know this, that through that, it caused me to, for myself personally, really dive into my relationship with Jesus. And I don't think before then you could have convinced me that there wasn't a God, but I know for a fact now you can't, because without God, I know I wouldn't be the person I am today, simply because He was my rock, and He was the person I leaned on, and He's who got me through it, and He's who gave me peace and comfort. And ultimately, I can be a shelter for other people in their life, and I can take other people to Jesus because I have had a shelter in my life, and that shelter was Jesus Christ. He was my fortress, and He was my guard. And so I can ultimately show people where their protection is in their time of hurt. We don't know the stories of these 4 men. We don't know if they had a past where somebody took them to Jesus or not. We ultimately know that somebody ultimately told them about Jesus for them to want to go, and they cared enough about that they took their friend. And we have all went through our own junk, and we all have our own past, and we all have our own mistakes, and we all have our own baggage, and we all have those dark rain cloud anniversary days in our lives. But we all have the opportunity to get up. And so in those situations, we can either choose to remain paralyzed in our fear, paralyzed in our own selfishness, or we can say, God, I'm going to trust that if I just go to Jesus, He'll take care of the rest. I don't know what He's going to do. I don't know if we'll see immediate result, but Jesus, being in the presence of Jesus, is ultimately going to be the best for this situation. And so tonight, I wasn't necessarily intending to even share that, but with it being the day that it is, and it's something that's on my mind, I just felt like somebody in here needed to hear that. That, in going, you carry your past with you. That's not always a bad thing. You might carry somebody to Jesus who changes the world, and your name might be a footnote in a story like this of you're just one of the men who held a corner of the map. But now, 2,000 years later, we're talking about that story. We're talking about those men, even though we don't know their name, they made ripple effects into all eternity. And I truly believe that we can have the opportunity to see some of that harvest. We might not even realize that the moment of the things that we're doing even has that big of an impact. They took their friend to Common Ground, BC, AD. And the world was forever changed because of that. And we have people's lives, so it could be a harmless lunch Or it could be a harmless invite to a church service, and it changes their life forever. One conversation, one word of encouragement, one pointing them to Jesus, and their life is forever changed. But one thing that blows my mind, that even in the middle of all of my insecurities, and even in the middle of all of my failures and all my weaknesses and all of those dark moments in my life, God still allows me to be a part of those go moments, of those moments that can be so good. And sadly, a lot of times when we think about going in our faith, we look at it with like begrudging attitudes, or really like, oh, I gotta do this. It's an obligation rather than like a opportunity. And we get the opportunity to work hand in hand with the Creator of the universe to make a difference that's far beyond ourselves. And that blows my mind. And so my prayer is that we take opportunities this next week and over the course of our lives to go and to make an impact and to take people to Jesus. Because if people wouldn't have continually brought me back into the presence of Jesus time and time again over the course of my life, there's no way I would have had the foundation I did to be able to lean on when I needed it the most, to even know where to turn. I have no idea how people make it through situations like that without God. I don't. And I guess they don't. A lot of people, they just live to die after horrible situations in their life, which isn't really living at all. And so I would just encourage you. I don't know where you're at right now in your relationship with God. I don't know what situations have happened to you in your past, but I know that God calls us to go. He calls us to go into all the nations and to make disciples, to teach everything that He has commanded us. But then He gives us this encouraging statement at the end. He said, remember, I'll be with you always. He's with you. He's with you when you see Him. He's with you when you don't see Him. And He will ultimately be your guide and your comfort and your shelter in good and bad times. So will we take that opportunity to go and to take people